When people argue about the richest person who ever lived, they name the ones you expect: the tech billionaires, the oil kings, the old American railroad and steel men. Famous names, huge fortunes. But there, a strong case that the richest human being who ever walked the earth lived 700 years ago, ruled a kingdom most people today couldn't point to on a map, and was so wealthy that when he went on one single trip, he accidentally wrecked the economy of an entire region just by being generous. His name was Mansa Musa, and his story is so big that the honest truth is, we can't even measure how rich he was. Not because the number is too small to bother with, because it's too big and too old to put into modern money at all. Let me show you why. First, let me be straight with you about something, because it matters. You will see people online slap a giant dollar number on Mansa Musa, $400 billion, the richest man in history, worth this exact amount. Ignore those numbers. They're made up. Nobody can truly turn the wealth of a king from the 1300s into today's dollars, because his world didn't work like ours. He didn't have a bank account. His riches were land, and gold mines, and salt, and control over trade, and an entire kingdom. You can add that up into one neat number. So the real answer to how rich was he isn't a dollar amount, it's a story. And the story is wilder than any number could be. Mansa Musa ruled an empire called Mali in West Africa about 700 years ago, and Mali sat on top of something the whole world wanted: gold. A huge amount of the gold flowing through the world at that time came from his lands. But gold wasn't even the only treasure. Mali also controlled something that sounds boring today but was worth a fortune back then: salt. We forget this now, because salt is cheap and sits in a shaker on every table. But long ago, salt was how you kept food from rotting. No fridges, no freezers. If you wanted meat to last through the year, you needed salt, and salt was rare in many places. In some regions, people traded salt for gold, weight for weight, equal. A block of salt for a block of gold. So picture it. Mansa Musa empire controlled both the gold and the salt, two of the most valuable things on earth at the time, and sat right in the middle of the trade routes where everyone had to pass through to get them. He didn't just own treasure. He owned the flow of treasure. Everyone else's riches passed through his hands and left a little behind. The word Mansa, by the way, basically meant king or emperor. So Mansa Musa is really King Musa. And King Musa was, by the standards of his time, almost unimaginably rich. But here's the thing. For most of the world, all of this was a secret. Far away in Europe and the Middle East, hardly anyone had heard of this kingdom or its king. Mali was rich and powerful, and most of the world had no idea it existed. That was about to change, because Mansa Musa decided to take a trip. Mansa Musa was a Muslim, and one of the deeply important things in his faith is a pilgrimage, a holy journey to the city of Mecca that believers try to make at least once in their lives. So around the year 1324, he set out from Mali to make that journey. Now, you and I might pack a bag for a long trip. Mansa Musa did not pack a bag. By the accounts that came down to us, he traveled with a procession so enormous it was hard to believe. Thousands and thousands of people, soldiers, servants, officials, long lines of camels and horses, and each animal said to be carrying heavy loads of gold, people dressed in fine silk. It was less like a man going on a trip and more like an entire glittering city slowly walking across the desert. And as this incredible parade moved, it passed through other lands and cities. And everywhere it stopped, Mansa Musa did what he believed a good and generous man should do. He gave gold away to the poor he met, to the cities he passed through, to anyone in need. He handed out gold like it was nothing, because to him, it nearly was. And that brings us to the most famous part of the whole story, the part that turned a rich king into a legend. The procession reached Cairo, one of the greatest cities in the world at the time. And in Cairo, Mansa Musa gave away gold the way he had everywhere else, freely, generously, in enormous amounts. He spent it, gifted it, poured it into the city. But this time, something strange happened. Something nobody expected. There was suddenly so much gold flowing into Cairo, all at once, that the gold itself started to lose its value. And to understand why, you have to understand a simple rule about anything precious. It's only worth a lot when it's rare. Gold is valuable, partly because there isn't much of it. But if a king shows up and floods a city with more gold than it has ever seen, all at once, then suddenly gold isn't so rare in that city anymore. And when something stops being rare, its value drops. So Mansa Musa, just by being generous, accidentally made gold worth less in Cairo, and not for a day. By the accounts passed down, the value of gold in that region stayed knocked down for years afterward. Years. One man, spending money on one trip, dented the price of gold across a whole region for a long time. Think about what that actually means, because it's almost hard to picture. We're not talking about a rich man buying a fancy house, or a yacht, or 100 yachts. We're talking about a single person carrying so much wealth that simply handing it out as he walked changed the price of the most precious metal on earth for an entire part of the Fard world. He didn't try to crash the gold market. He was being kind. The wealth was just so vast that kindness alone was enough to shake an economy. That is a level of rich that's hard to even hold in your head. It's not more money than other rich people. It's so much money that the normal rules of money stopped working around him. And here's the part that often gets forgotten, which is a shame, because it might be the best part. Mansa Musa wasn't just a man who threw gold around. When he came home from his journey, he poured his wealth into something that lasted far longer than a flashy parade. He built. He brought back scholars and architects. He turned cities in his empire, especially the famous city of Timbuktu, into glowing centers of learning and faith and trade. Grand buildings, great mosques, and libraries, places of books and study that drew thinkers and students from far away. For a time, Timbuktu became one of the important places in the world to go and learn. A city of scholars, in the middle of the empire that gold built. So his wealth didn't just sparkle and vanish. Some of it turned into knowledge and buildings and a place whose name people still say with wonder today. But let's go back to that big question, because now we can finally answer it honestly. How rich was Mansa Musa, really? And the truthful answer is, richer than we can measure. And that's exactly what makes him special. With modern billionaires, you can look it up. You can find a number, watch it change day to day, rank them in a tidy list. Their wealth is mostly numbers on screens, easy to count. Mansa Musa's wealth wasn't like that. It was gold pulled from the earth, and salt worth its weight in gold, and control over the trade routes of half a continent, and an entire empire of land and people. You can shrink that down to $1 figure, no matter how hard the internet tries. And honestly, the attempts to do it, those giant made-up numbers, actually make him seem smaller, not bigger. They squeeze a king who shook the price of gold into a number on a list next to people who never came close. The real measure of Mansa Musa isn't a dollar amount. It's the fact that we're still telling his story 700 years later. It's a man so wealthy that the most precious metal in the world got cheaper wherever he went. It's an empire of gold and salt, and learning that most of the world had never even heard of, until its king walked out of the desert and handed out fortunes like gifts. So the next time someone asks who the richest person who ever lived was, you can tell them it probably wasn't any of the famous names they're thinking of. It was a king from 700 years ago, from a kingdom built on gold and salt, who went on one journey and accidentally proved something that all the billionaires since have never quite matched. That there is a kind of rich so enormous, so far beyond normal, that you can't write it as a number at all. You can only tell the story. And his story is still being told.